The NFL draft is weeks away, but March is here, which means the madness is right around the corner. There's buzzer beaters. There's the Cinderella stories. Which teams are going to make the Final Four? Get in on the sports betting action today over at BetOnline.ag. There's also NBA and NHL. Head over to BetOnline.ag today. BetOnline, the game starts here. Now, let's get to today's guest to recap the 2025 NFL Combine. Our good friend Joe DeLeone is here. He was boots on the ground at the NFL Combine. You can see and hear his coverage. He's an NFL draft and college football analyst for A to Z Sports. Joe, good to see you, my friend. Boots on the ground in Indy. I hope you made it over to St. Elmo's this past weekend.
I did. Thankfully, the first time I went last year, did not go to St. Elmo's, and it was one of the biggest mistakes. Waited way too long to book the reservation. Did it months ago this time, and it lived up to the hype. It absolutely did. I'm glad that I went.
Did you get the spicy shrimp cocktail?
I did. That knocked the wind out of me in a way. That is unexpectedly a sinus clearer, but it was worth trying. It was definitely worth saying I've had it before.
Yeah, it'll put some hair on your chest. It separates the men from the boys. Certainly. And yeah, the way I got in last year was I went upstairs to the lounge that they had, and I was able to get up there before they had booked the upstairs area for a private party. So that's how I was able to go a year ago. Pro tip. And I think it was either the Wednesday or the Thursday that I got in a year ago. Anyways, we got you here. The Steelers have the 21st pick in the draft. Pittsburgh needs a lot of help. It looks like Justin Fields will be back. It's either going to be Fields or Wilson, but the Steelers have position needs. Assuming Najee Harris is gone, you've got running back, the receiver position, someone to complement George Pickens. At the defensive tackle position, sure, you still have Cam Hayward, but he's going to be 36. And then who is the cornerback opposite Joey Porter Jr.? Take this in any direction you want to, Joe, but at 21, is there a prospect that you like for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Well, one, to just quickly touch on the quarterback thing, one thing that I've seen mock drafts pitch out there that a quarterback could go in the first round, and it does not sound like that is going to be the case. I think that they're prioritizing other positions because of what you just mentioned, bringing back Wilson or Fields. They would much rather try and roll what they have than drafting a quarterback this deep into the first round with not many good options. For me, though, I think the priority has to be receiver. They need to find a receiver opposite of George Pickens. I know that, Mike Williams was brought in at the end of the year. He's not really the same Mike Williams that we once saw early on in his career with the Chargers. They need somebody who is an opposite skill set of George Pickens. We know that George Pickens is a dominant contested catch guy. He has a very physical profile. I would love to see the Steelers have somebody who can be really explosive coming out of the slot. So I look at Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, who was a premier player in the slot for Jeremiah Smith, who was on the outside and winning in those contested spots. Or the thought of Luther Burden, who tested extremely well, tested a lot better than I think some people were thinking he would, runs a 4.4, looks really smooth in everything else that he does. Burden would be a home run. He gets a lot of comparisons to Deebo Samuel. Golden Tate is another example of what you can expect from him. He could truly be that yak threat with the ball in his hands that is completely different from what you already have with Pickens.
Music to my ears. Egbuka is someone I've heard linked to the Steelers now for weeks in advance of the Combine. I know he's a prospect a lot of Steelers fans are excited about because George Pickens is entering the final year of his contract, but the only other receivers Pittsburgh has under contract for the 2025 season, Calvin Austin III, and then Roman Wilson, who didn't play much as a rookie at all. It went just about as poorly as you would have hoped because he wasn't on the field. So you're going to have somebody opposite George Pickens. You mentioned Egbuka out of Ohio State, which has been a pipeline to the NFL of stud wide receivers. Luther Burden III, though, my guy out of the University of Missouri. I'm a Mizzou alum, so this is someone I'm very familiar with watching. And he was the Tigers' playmaker these last 2 years when you needed the chains moved on key third and fourth down conversions. He was the guy that Mizzou went to and quarterback Brady Cook went to time and time and time again. Now, I know a year ago when they beat Ohio State in the bowl game, Cody Schrader, the running back, got a lot of the limelight. Schrader has been with the Rams in the NFL, but when the chains needed to be moved on a long down and distance, it was Luther Burden III. And I think either addition for the Pittsburgh Steelers would be just welcome because, like, I always tell people, Joe, it's like when we're playing Madden, there's George Pickens and then there's everyone else. And it's not a knock on the Steelers receiving core. Well, actually, it is. Just the production has not been there. The production hasn't been there at the receiving position outside of George Pickens.
Well, and I don't think it's so wrong to criticize the receiver room because, frankly, right now it's the biggest weakness. We saw how dead the offense was in the playoffs. Like they could barely move the ball and generate splash plays. But Pickens is a great receiver, but if Pickens is your only option, you're in a lot of trouble. It hurts Pickens also as a player, him not to have somebody to distract an opposing defense is creating issues. And you could have so much more production with a guy like Luther Burden in the mix. And a lot of people might be disappointed hearing of Luther Burden because they think, oh, he completely fell off. This is going to be a bust. His numbers this year were terrible. There's a lot more complicated circumstances that need to be brought up. As you know, with Missouri this year, the lack of health from the offense and the offense taking a huge step back was why he didn't play as well. It has nothing to do with his skill set. I think if you put him into this offense, if it's Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, that he would really flourish and he would really shine playing in the slot.
Which prospect do you like better between Egbuka and Burden?
Personally, I like Burden a little bit more. I think Burden's a little bit more explosive. I think that he is a little bit more impactful with the ball in his hands. And I have to bring up one more guy who's actually one of my favorite receiver prospect. He's my number one guy who might also be in consideration. More as a Z receiver, not a slot. Matthew Golden from Texas. He had the best testing out of any of the receivers at the combine. I was a little unsure of committing to him being my wide receiver one because of him maybe not having that long speed, but he runs a 4.29, which was the fastest of any of the receivers. That blew me away. I was not expecting that at all. And that comes with great route running, great feet, and also really, really good hands to make some unbelievable and exciting highlight reel catches like he did in the last few games of the year. So there's some pretty good options just outside of those two guys that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were expecting his teammate in college, Isaiah Bonds, to test the way that he did. But it was
He even said it. He even boasted that he was going to break Xavier Worthy's time, and he wasn't even close.
Yeah. Listen, if football doesn't work out for the Texas guys, I know who we're sending for the next Olympics for a 4x100 track team, man.
Right.
Those dudes can fly.
No, the speed is always been coveted by Steve Sarkisian because it's how he builds his offense. And I think that for any team, even if Isaiah Bond didn't finish that well, and Jaden Bleav, who was the running back who also promised he was going to run a crazy time that he didn't run, he's still a spark plug of a playmaker. And on the last bit, Matthew Golden is a spark plug of a playmaker. So if you need speed, which the Steelers need, any of those three guys at later points in the draft are worth looking at.
Yeah, and I think, too, though, we look at Xavier Worthy from this past year and how fortunate he was to go to Andy Reid and the Chiefs offense of they know how to utilize a guy of his skill set. In his rookie year, which I think was a very good season, it was like a Tyreek Hill light type of player. The thing I worry about with the Steelers just a little bit is like, yes, you want the different types of cars, the different types of receivers. Can they utilize a receiver with this twitchier, the speedy, the more quick game facets of an offense? And really it's what Deontay Johnson was doing in this offense before they traded him to Carolina. Now, I understand why Pittsburgh does that. I mean, he was on 3 or 4 teams in a calendar year, but they've never really replaced that production from the offensive standpoint. And again, it's having that complement to George Pickens. A lot of Steelers fans want to run George Pickens out of town. And I'm saying you're going to be creating an even bigger problem, even despite the fact some of the problems he has on the field. He's got to mature, no doubt about that. But if you trade him away, what does this offense even look like? And I'll end here too. People want to knock the quarterbacks and you get what you pay for and the 5 straight losses to end the season. Quarterback wasn't the biggest issue. And when I look at it from Russell Wilson this past year as a Pro Bowl alternate, you don't have cornerstones on offense right now, and that is what is needed to achieve success in the NFL in 2025 and beyond. True difference makers on offense, blue chip caliber players that would start for other franchises. Hopefully they can get one at the receiver position in this draft because they desperately need it, Joe.
And I think overall, the Steelers have done it the right way over the last couple of drafts, which is building through their offensive line. I think a lot of teams put the cart before the horse and they think that, like, hey, we're going to get all these athletes, all these playmakers, we're going to draft our young quarterback, but then they don't have the O-line to protect the quarterback, to give him time to create plays, to open rushing lanes for running backs. That investment to the O-line is great for the future of this team as they're starting to mature, all those linemen are. But now is the time, when you look at this roster, it doesn't have an elite playmaker, somebody who can be turned to in tight, important late game situations that can be relied on. You just mentioned how, like, Russell Wilson was a Pro Bowler. A little bit unjustifiably was a Pro Bowler because he didn't finish the year very strong.
Yeah.
They could do better there. And then I think the way that if Russell Wilson does come back or it's Justin Fields, you need to set them up for better success by giving them more weapons.
Yeah. I mean, the glass half full perspective here, looking at here, would be, you mentioned the offensive line, Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, that those can be your offensive tackles for the next decade. That's the glass half full perspective. They're going to go right from the frying pan right into the fire. It looks like Broderick's going to move over to the left side, and then Fautanu is going to be the starting right tackle for the 2025 season for the Steelers. I do want to move to the defensive side of the ball, and I really want to focus on the defensive tackle position. And the reason I say this, Joe, is Cam Hayward, who's played at an all-pro level for years now. The analogy I make to you is this. He's 36 years old. It's like when you go to the fridge and you go check the milk, and it's either at or nearing the expiration date. And it's like, yeah, I smell this. Still smells good, but you don't know how much longer it will last. Which prospects do you like for the Steelers, whether it's first, second, third round at the defensive tackle position, because they've got to restock the cupboard there. I just don't know how much longer Cam Hayward has left because he's already beyond his expiration date, in my opinion. What say you?
Well, the most important part about this discussion is we need a guy that's scheme specific and that is going to specifically replace the role of what Cam Hayward was, which he's a defensive tackle, but he's effectively a 3-4 defensive end. So we need somebody who's got a lot of length, that has a lot of size. Keanu Benton has been awesome in the middle, so we need to find somebody who's taller and longer than him. Derek Harmon from Oregon is the guy that I immediately think of that fits that description of a tall, long 3-4 defensive end. Not like a super productive sack getter, which is not what you need from a player like this, but you need the physical profile. And he is a light-footed, good athlete for his size and for his length. So, like, immediately day 2 in the second or third round in a class that's loaded with defensive tackle talent, the one that would be perfect, like absolutely perfect for player profile, to scheme fit, to defensive minded fit, Derek Harmon of Oregon is the one I think of immediately.
I look at the size as well, 6'4", 313, and someone who can fill holes up front, because in that 3-4 technique, or even when you go to the nickel, who's someone who can plug gaps, and then your linebackers, I mean, Patrick Queen and company, to where they can run around and make plays, but someone who can, I mean, I'm talking A gap, B gap, and the Steelers are known for their vaunted defense and everything. That all falls apart if you don't have a stout interior.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that all-pro level production from Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi has been solid. You mentioned Keanu Benton, who I'd like to see continue to develop. They need whoever that next guy is, though, because, again, I look at how good Cam Hayward has been for so long, but it's like I need more of a the training camp needs to be more of a country club style training camp for him at this stage in his career, and that's to preserve him for when you need him later and later into the season. If he gets hurt, all of this falls apart. You render TJ Watt useless. You render, Alex Highsmith and Herbig off the edge, Queen at the linebacker position, Joey Porter Jr. What you need from all pro level production for what you're paying Minkah Fitzpatrick. If you don't have the A gap and B gap sound plugged to where you can dominate there, everything else falls apart with this defense. I think that this is so critical for the Steelers to get right, whether it's through the draft or free agency. And it's not a knock on Cam Hayward, because he's been so good for so long. It's, again, go back to the milk carton analogy, how much longer you can continue to rely on that. It's honestly the biggest thing this offseason I'm worried about from the Pittsburgh Steelers standpoint. Yeah, I want to figure out the quarterback of the future. I don't think that's there this offseason. I think you have to already start to stack the deck and get your assets ready for next offseason for quarterback long term. But right now, for the NFL's highest paid defense, this is just of the utmost importance for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Well, and the good thing for the Steelers is that even if they wanted to maybe double dip in the second or third round and then
Let's
come back
do it.
around
Yes.
late on, this is one of the deepest defensive tackle classes that I have ever seen. I think it's going to be one of those classes where there's going to be fifth, sixth rounders that'll be important starters for teams that in a couple of years we're going to be wondering, like, wow, how did that guy end up sliding? Well, it's just because there were so many other names ahead of him. And there's so many different body types that can fit many different roles. I know that we're like super caught up with the Mason Grahams and the Kenneth Grants of the world, but you can go and get an Omar Norman Lott, who's very quick-footed. You can get an Alfred Collins, who is just a physical, dominant run defender coming out of Texas. Darius Alexander from Toledo is a guy that I really, really love, who could maybe even slot into that position of playing that 3-4 defensive end, because he's another player with great length and super light feet. And I implore anybody to go look up the Pitt game against Toledo in the bowl game. He returned a pick six. He picked off a quarterback and returned it for a touchdown. So if you're looking for some athleticism and some freakish dudes, they can be found in this class.
All right. So one thing I want to ask you, then we'll go to the next position is if the Steelers want to kick Benton out to more of that defensive end style and get a pure, more nose tackle type, is there a big guy out front, someone who's going to line up, either directly over the center or in a one technique that you really like in this draft class?
The one, and you can get him quite late. You could probably get him fourth or fifth round because he's very position specific. Jamari Caldwell, another Oregon guy. This Oregon defensive line was unbelievable. He's 340 pounds. He's around 6'1". He had some really unexpectedly good and also quietly good. Not enough people were giving love and recognition for the testing that he did. I think he ran like a 5'1" at 340 pounds, which is a really fast time for a dude of that build. He gets moving in a hurry, and he's just one of those guys that fits that prototype of, hey, I'm going to stick somebody over the center, and I'm going to ruin the center's day every single snap, and he just goes to war. Maybe isn't going to have any tackle for loss production or sack production, but you need somebody who is going to frustrate and, flummox interior offensive linemen. I love the idea of moving Benton out a little bit, because coming out, I thought Benton was going to be more so playing that 3-4 defensive end style position because of the length that he brings and also the upside that he has with his hands to create pressures as a pass rusher. So taking Caldwell and moving him out, I would be very satisfied if that was the move.
And I'd be fine double dipping, where you can move guys around depending on what you want to do on that particular player, that point in the game. So again, it's something that Pittsburgh does need to figure out. I want to go back to offense, and we'll go back to defense. We're ping-ponging here a little bit. This is also a loaded running back class, and I'm assuming Najee Harris is going to test the waters in free agency. I don't expect Najee Harris back in a Steelers uniform. I think there's the possibility that happens, but this is just so loaded at running back. I think that the Steelers will draft a running back and pair that player with Jaylen Warren. And again, it's almost like pick the style of running back that you want, Joe, because it's like, I look at the very top where Omarion Hampton had a very good draft. Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State is also a coveted prospect. But take this in any direction with the running backs from what you saw at the combine, because all of them seem to run really good 40s as well from what I saw this past weekend.
Yeah, the speed that a group that was supposed to be loaded with power backs was really unexpected and also exciting. And I think if you're trying to look for the counter to Jaylen Warren and you let Najee Harris go sign elsewhere, I am looking for one of the bruisers. And there's three guys on day two that I think could be targeted by the Steelers. You mentioned Omarion Hampton, who is a tank. He just loves to run through people, not like a true separator, but he has that athleticism to run past guys and to pick up speed quickly in certain areas. I also like Damian Martinez, who maybe might go early day 3 from Miami. He formerly of Oregon State is another guy who's just super wide, super physical, picks up speed very quickly, run through any type of contact that you put in front of him. And then the last one, a guy who kind of reminds me of Le'Veon Bell a little bit, DJ Giddens from Kansas State. You see the patience and you see the ability to kind of like wait for the line to open up in front of him before he hits that hole hard. He also has some upside and some impact as a receiver. So DJ Giddens in the second or third round could also be just a perfect option and a fit for Arthur Smith's offense.
You mentioned Le'Veon Bell and Steelers fans. You got in good with the Yinzers, Joe. They're doing cartwheels listening to this over here. The patience is what I noticed if you compare to Le'Veon Bell of waiting for the hole to develop, and then once it's there, hitting it immediately with that quick twitch, that quickness. I mean, Steelers fans are going to be over the moon. Omarion Hampton. Joe, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, so I have had the chance to see Hampton play in person. And 2 years ago, he had Drake May, Tez Walker, lighting up scoreboards. And so he had a 1,500-yard season where it's just like, okay, he might not be the primary focus for a defense because of the talent that Drake May brings in the passing game. Well, this past season, he didn't have that, and teams are keying in on him, stacking the box, and he still had an extremely productive season. And I look at a guy where I know a college coach is going to tout up his player, but Mack Brown's been around for a long time. Legendary Texas coach. He's had 2 stints at North Carolina. When he's saying he's one of the best players he's ever coached in however many decades he's been doing it, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm going to say this too. I know G&T was a Heisman candidate as well. I think Omarion Hampton is the best running back in this class. That's just my opinion. You might say, well, the 40-yard dash isn't there as fast as some of the other players. I look at the broad jump, so the explosiveness is still there. And then you also have to factor in he's 220 pounds. So if I'm Pittsburgh at 21, I don't like drafting a running back in the first round. But if he's there in the second round, that's when I think you have to take a long look. When the Steelers drafted Najee Harris, they were coming off the year where James Conner battled injuries yet again. And our Ernie II said the Steelers are never going to finish last in the NFL in rushing ever again. So I understand why they drafted Najee. Najee's been a good player. He's stayed healthy, but Najee Harris hasn't been what Pittsburgh has needed as a first-round pick. That's not all his fault because the offensive line hasn't been very good to help get him going, but they need someone who can move the chains more consistently. Jaylen Warren has done that. I understand Najee Harris isn't that style of runner, but for the money that you could pay Najee Harris to bring him back, I think you can get better production out of a player in the second, third, or fourth round of this draft, and that's why I would look to the draft to improve the running back position for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, and I know that there's been like a little bit of buzz for Hampton to go in the first round this year, but like I don't really foresee NFL teams wanting to do that because this running back class is so deep. They can address other positions that have a lot more scarcity, like offensive tackle, like receiver, where they don't want to miss out and then have to come back the next round and everybody that they like is off the board. Running back, there's just so many different guys that can play different roles that are going to be available very late in this draft. If you miss out on any of those guys that mentioned, a guy like Devin Neal could be on the board later on. Guys like Kyle Monangai from Rutgers could be on the board later on. So there's just so many options that I think that the NFL is going to be not careful but patient in selecting running backs in this class.
Yeah, you mentioned Neal, the program record at Kansas for touchdowns, a guy with just a nose for the end zone. So I look at the long list and it's like, I like this guy, like this guy, like this guy, like this guy. There's just so much choice to where, again, I think you can get better production than Najee Harris. We'll see what happens between now and March 12th. So a week from Tuesday, free agency gets rolling 4:00 Eastern time. And so we might know even before then how that's going to shake out. And then what you do in free agency is going to be the tail of the tape of what you got to do in the draft to upgrade your other needs. I do want to get to corner as well before we get you out of here, Joe. At the cornerback position, which players did you like? Because right now, Steelers have Joey Porter Jr., and then just a huge question mark is Dante Jackson, their starter this last year, is due to become a free agent.
Yeah, the corner class is a little interesting to talk about because like a lot of these guys didn't really test. So like we didn't get the opportunity to at the combine, like have a lot of crazy takeaways from somebody putting up some crazy numbers. But Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky is a name to pay attention to. Apparently, I had heard that he had a bit of a medical issue that came up during the season that impacted his play at the end of the year, which was why he didn't finish the year as strong and why his tape didn't look as good as it did prior to that. He ran the fastest time of the cornerbacks in this class. But there's also just a lot of other names to look at in the first round, the second round. Savon Ravel, I Bleav I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's got a very unique pronunciation. He is coming off of an ACL injury this year and could be somebody the back end of the first round that is on the board. A height, weight, speed freak at 6'3" and can move like he is 5'9". The last that I'm a big fan of early is Azariah Thomas from Florida State, who just is so fluid and long and plays to that play style that Pittsburgh likes to have, which is physical press man corners, and he's got really fluid hips to track and to run with guys. So you could end up having two lockdown corners that are blasting players at the line of scrimmage and not letting them get free releases.
Yeah, and if you can play man, what that can do to help open up the defense to blitz and get after quarterbacks is just, they almost say like the tall avatar style cornerback because it's harder to throw over the top of that style of corner. I know the league is moving more and more to that. So you mentioned the size and speed. Usually you get one or the other, but some of these prospects have both, and it's just terrifying. It's just terrifying. So really quickly, before we get you out of here, I do want to ask you this lastly. So it sounds like running back and defensive tackle are the positions that have the most depth. Which position has the least depth?
Least depth, I would put a tie between receiver and offensive tackle, minus quarterback, where I'm almost like nauseated talking about quarterbacks anymore because I get some of these questions and I'm like, I'm not trying to, like, you get asked about like Will Howard starting and it's like, no, I'm not there. And I keep getting also asked like, could Jackson Dart go in the first round? I'm like, I'm not there. There are two good quarterbacks. There's a bunch of question marks and then that's it. If there is a historically low amount of quarterbacks selected this year, it wouldn't surprise me. But offensive tackle, I think fits that description a little bit more than receiver. I think receiver, there's some interesting day 3 options, but there's just not many chances for like a gem, a lower unexpected name to turn out to be a really productive player. Usually in a draft, we have that. We've got a small school guy. We've got a crazy good athlete that just wasn't consistent. We don't really have a lot of those. At offensive tackle, we have one. We have a lot of tackles that are being projected to move into guard, which is already not a good sign. Second, I remember I did a 7-round mock draft a couple weeks ago or a week ago for Pro Football Network. And when I was starting to find places to send these dudes, when I got to the 4th round, and I think Jalen Travis and Ozzie Trapilo from Boston College, Travis from Iowa State were like the last two guys that I sent off places to teams that needed either a starting tackle or a developmental tackle. And I looked at the board who was still left, and I'm like, wow, none of these guys are going to contribute. None of these guys are maybe even going to stick on rosters. Like, there's just not a lot of options for even depth pieces at offensive line in this class. So there is, I think, going to be an aggressive push for any team that needs to address tackle to try to address it early. And then I wouldn't even be surprised if there's like a quick early run on tackles that happens in the first round and then eventually somewhere on day 2. Luckily for the Steelers, they have their tackle situation figured out. And I almost would even pitch this. If you're sitting at 21 and a team is really badly needs to find someone, and Josh Simmons is still on the board or Armand Membau is still on the board, I would inquire about trading back. I would try and see if you can get somebody to trade back, because this draft class has a unique bunch of players that the middle of the first round to the end of the second round all have very similar grades. So that means instead of drafting somebody at 21 and getting one player, you could get two guys of similar quality that go on to be good starters, maybe not elite starters, but good starters. This is a draft to move back in order to allow other teams to freak out.
Great stuff there, Joe. And you can check out his work over at A to Z Sports. Also, you can hear him on the Ruffino and Joe show. Joe, if there's anything that you need to plug, please take it away.
Yeah, just follow me on Twitter at Joe DeLeone and the A to Z Film Room. We're doing quick breakdowns on prospects as well as getting to all the major headlines. You can check that out on YouTube. We're almost to 40,000 subs, so almost trying to get over the hump there for before draft time. But Mark, I really appreciated getting to chat with you again. As always, it's always fun to catch up and talk a little bit about the Steelers.
Absolutely. He's Joe DeLeone. I'm Mark Bergin. Thanks for listening to the Bleav in Steelers show, Apple and Spotify. 5 stars only. We're going to have more insight from one of Joe's colleagues as well here this week on the Bleav in Steelers show as well. So check that out. We'll have more combine recap and then breaking things down between now and April in the 2025 NFL draft. Thank you again to Joe DeLeone. My name is Mark Bergin, and this has been another edition of the Bleav in Steelers show.